Hello, everyone. Welcome to In the Free Zone. Derek's going to join us this evening. We're going to talk about several things, but one of the main things that we're going to talk about is the concept of running up the score. Over the years as a coach, I've been on both ends of some pretty major league ass kickings, and it's never a good thing, especially if you're on the receiving end. But we're going to talk a little bit about that, and one of the things that brings that up is that Silver Lake Friday night beat Oskaloosa 96-0. And that is a big score. Okay. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is I want to talk about the ethics of running the score up, whether or not Silver Lake ran the score up on Oskaloosa, the effects that it has on both teams, and a little bit of coaching philosophy that kind of surrounds that. So, Derek, when you hear a score of 96-0, does that sound to you like somebody ran the score up on someone? I can't hear you, Derek. I'm sorry.
It sounds like I'm watching two 12-year-olds play Madden, and one of them's way better than the other one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And listen, first of all, that type of a score doesn't happen unless there is a big talent disparity between the two teams. Okay. And at the small school level, you are far more likely, and that's not saying it doesn't happen at the big school level. It does, because Wichita East laid an 80-0 beat down on Wichita North earlier in the season too. Okay. But at the small school level, you're far more likely to get that big talent disparity between the two teams. Okay. Silver Lake's a traditional power. They year in and year out win at least 8 or 9 games. They're usually deep into the playoffs just about every year. Okay. Oskaloosa is not. Oskaloosa is, and I'm not trying to run Oskaloosa down. Okay. They've had some good teams there. I'm sure they have great people and a great program. Okay. But traditionally, they have not won a lot of games. They've had a lot of losing seasons. So my first guess is there's probably a huge talent disparity between the two teams. Okay. The second thing is, I think we lose sight of the coaching philosophy behind a score like that. Okay. Now, some coaches intentionally run scores up on other teams, other coaches, other towns, because they don't like them. Okay. And that certainly does happen. And I'm not going to try to tell you that it doesn't. I don't know all the particulars of the Silver Lake Oskaloosa game. I've heard that Silver Lake played most of the second half with their second and third team. Okay. Generally, coaching ethics, and it's a lot of gray area here, but generally coaching ethics says it's okay to keep your first team in until halftime. It's okay to do everything you can in the first half. But in the second half, you get your reserves in there, and you get your reserves in there, and you try to, let's see, how do I put this? You don't ever take your foot off the gas. Okay. Whatever team you put in there, whether it's your second team, your third team, your freshman, they play hard. Okay. You don't ever ask kids to not play hard. But there are things you can do to avoid running up a score on somebody without asking, your players to not play hard. Okay. So sometimes when somebody really runs up a score on another school, what has happened is this. And this may well have been the case with Oskaloosa and Silver Lake. We in the COVID times, we have no idea what's going on. Oskaloosa may have had players in quarantine. Right. And so they didn't have some of their frontline troops. Okay. That might have been something that had an effect. That might have accentuated the talent deficit between the two teams. Okay. Another thing that happens, and again, I know this because I've been on both ends of it, is sometimes once you get far enough behind, your team quits. They really do. And all coaches, we hate to admit that. We all want to think that we coach our kids to never give up and that they don't ever give up. But in reality, no matter what, your team has a breaking point. Okay. I coached at Elkhart through what was, I believe, a 44 game losing streak. Okay. Wasn't there for all 44 games, but I was certainly there for plenty of those. Okay. And we endured a lot of beatdowns in that time. Luckily, it was never 96-0 or 80-0 or anything like that. But we endured a lot of beatdowns in that time period. And I'll guarantee you, no matter how hard I coached and how hard those kids wanted to play, there were times with those teams that they reached the breaking point and they quit, you know? And I'm not disparaging those kids by saying that. That is human nature. You reach a point where you've had enough and you give up, okay? And no matter how much we like to tell ourselves that we coach teams that never give up, every team has its breaking point, okay? By the way, the highest scoring game in the history of high school football occurred in the state of Kansas. It was also the most one-sided ass kicking in the history of Kansas, of high school football. Okay. And that was a 212-0 win. I wish I remembered the names of the two schools that it involved. I don't anymore. I'd have to look it up. But it did actually happen in the state of Kansas, 212-0. And now we're going back into, like, if I remember right, the 20s. So we're talking about a long time ago. Okay. But I can guarantee you that in that game, that's exactly what happened. At some point there, the other team reached their breaking point and they quit, you know. We now have, well, in 8-man, there is already a mercy rule, okay? There's a 45-point rule after halftime. So if you hit 45 points at any time in the game, how do I put this? Okay, so in first half, there's no mercy rule. But after the half, if at any time the deficit between the two teams gets to 45 points, the game is over, okay? Now, in 8-man, a lot of schools use that to their advantage. I coached a year of 8-man at Moscow, and all but one of the games we played, both the ones we won and the ones we lost, all but one of the games we played that year ended early, okay? And part of the reason is there were times that we only had 9 players to field an 8-man roster. So if we were up and we had a chance to end a game early and cut down on the chance of getting somebody hurt or something like that, we were going to end that game early. We would try to hit 45 points, okay? And other coaches had similar philosophies, maybe for different reasons, okay? But we had not had the mercy rule in 11-man until about 12, 13 years ago when Smith Center scored 79 points on Plainville in the first quarter. Okay? Yeah, exactly. And since then, there has been the 11-man rule now, which, by the way, only goes into effect in the playoffs, is if at any point you hit 45 points, there's a running clock in the second half. So that's the closest thing there is to a mercy rule in 11-man. And a lot of leagues adopted that same rule too. So while you don't see it everywhere, a lot of leagues have adopted it, and it always applies in the playoffs. And that's the closest thing to a mercy rule we have in 11-man. And that originally, you know, people would call it the Smith Center rule because of the origin of it.
It was 1926 Haven High School in Haven, Kansas, and they defeated Sylvia High School, and it was actually 256-0.
256. Wow, I thought it was 212. Yeah, it was ridiculous. 256-0.
So wow. My question is this, to get 256, that means they probably had to leave their best players in the whole time. I mean, well, I get maybe trying to set a record like they did. Like nobody's ever gonna talk about, hey, remember Haven High School from Haven, Kansas, but now they're on Wikipedia. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's that aspect of it, but I mean, what do you get out of destroying somebody like that?
And that's where kind of the coaching ethics of it come in. Yeah, you don't get anything out of it. Okay. I understand the coaches that say my first team needs experience. I'm going to play them the first half no matter what. Okay. I don't necessarily always agree with that, but I understand it. Okay. However, when your first team is out there and they're just running through the other team, almost like the other team was holding dummies, you're not getting anything out of that. Okay. All you're doing is you're risking injury to your players and the opposing team's players. But we know you care about your players if you don't care about the opposing team's players. All you're doing is risking injury to your players to run up meaningless statistics. To me, my personal opinion.
Okay. Are they meaningless statistics, or do they? Could you argue that those stats help you out with like going to a school or something?
I'm not going to say that they don't help you out. Okay. But I do think that most college coaches, if we're talking about scholarships, stat line might catch their eye, but they're going to watch film. And if they see that you're running up your stats against a bunch of totally inferior opposition, they're not terribly impressed with that. What they want to see is they want to see you running up stats against, a good team. Great example of that, okay? Happened this weekend in college football. Mississippi State played LSU, and it was Mike Leach's first game in the SEC as a head coach. He's the coach of Mississippi State. For those of you that don't know who Mike Leach is, Mike Leach was the coach at Texas Tech through their air raid years when they beat Texas and almost won a Big 12 championship. Mike Leach then went to Washington State. Mike Leach has always had a reputation for wide open passing offenses. As a matter of fact, the offense he runs is called the air raid. And he has a reputation for building good teams, really good teams, out of really mediocre talent. Okay. So this was his first game as the head coach of Mississippi State, his first game in the SEC. Of course, there was a lot of talk about how the air raid wasn't going to work in the SEC. The defenses were way too good. Their first game was against LSU, the defending national champions. And their quarterback, CJ Costello, I think is his name, threw for 623 yards, which was a new SEC record in passing. And they beat the defending national champions by 10 points. Okay. So we found out a couple of things. Number one, we found out the air raid will work in the SEC. Okay. And it will work against a quality opponent. This was the defending national champion. We were talking about it in Vanderbilt. We're talking about. Okay. And number two, we also found out that impressive statistics are far more impressive when they come against quality competition, right? 623 passing yards is pretty impressive against a school that has been called by a lot of people DBU, Defensive Back University, right? And they made LSU's defensive backs look pretty average. If they had rolled up those same kind of statistics against another school, it still would have been an SEC record. It still would have gotten Costello some attention, but it wouldn't have been nearly as impressive as it was against the competition that it was against. And so, yeah, building stats, it can help you, but really it's building stats against quality competition that really helps you.
Yeah.
Now, kind of getting back to the personal ethics, I'm going to tell a little story here. I don't do this very often, but tell a little story about my past. When I was playing in high school, my senior year, Hugoton had a very good team. We ended up 10-1, I believe. Okay. We played Kinsley, and Kinsley that year would not have been good anyway. And then they had several injuries over the course of the year. And by the end of the season, they were a team that had pretty much folded up shop and quit. Okay. I mean, they were still playing, but they were basically going through the motions. Week 7, they played Lakin. And Lakin ran up a score on them. And I'm sure Lakin's coach thought that, he was trying to avoid running up a score by doing what he did. But supposedly, and I don't know this for sure, but supposedly Lakin's first team then, they got dressed at halftime and didn't even suit up in the second half, and they played their second and third team. Well, a lot of people saw that as really an insult too, that they didn't dress their first team out for the second half. And yeah, I can kind of see that if that's true, you know. But the point was that Kinsley was really, really down, okay? So we came to play Kinsley the next week, and they kicked off to us, and our offense took the field. The first play of the game, our first offense went out there, and we scored on the first play from scrimmage. And that was the last play that our first offense played as a unit the rest of the game. Now, that's not to say that Dad didn't play some of his best players. He did. But like the next series that the offense went out there, we had the first offensive line and the second team backfield. And then the next series after that, it may have been the second team line and the first team backfield. And he mixed things up like that and never put the first team in as a unit again. And I don't believe our first team defense ever played a play as a unit. I think he mixed the defense up to a mixture of first team and second team and even third team at times. Now, the reason he did that was partially he didn't want to humiliate Kinsley, okay? We ended up beating them 33-0. Pretty, we still beat them solidly, but we definitely, to me, didn't run up a score on them, okay? But he got his players quality reps by mixing up the teams, right? He gave those second team backs a chance to run behind the first team line. He gave those second team linemen a chance to block and see if they could open holes for maybe the first team quarterback and running backs, you know? And so by doing that, his idea was to still get quality reps for his players, but at the same time to try to avoid running up the score. The other thing you can do as a coach too to keep from running up a score while still having your kids play hard is you can adjust your play calling, right? You know which plays are far more likely to go for a long score and which plays are more likely to be a 5-yard gain as a coach, right? And there's nothing wrong with working on your short ground game. There's nothing wrong with panning out 4 or 5 yards, you know? And sometimes, yeah, you're playing a team that tackles poorly enough that what ought to be a 5-yard dive up the middle breaks for a touchdown. That happens. But you know that you're far more likely to break long plays running sweeps and reverses and things like that, right? So another thing you do as a coach to avoid running up the score is you adjust your play calling. And then the other thing is you burn clock, right? If I don't want to run up a score on a team, then we're going to take as long between plays as we can. And we're never going to snap the ball until all right. In big schools, we've all got play clocks, okay? And you tell your quarterback, don't snap the ball with more than 5 seconds on the play clock. Here at Elkhart, we're lucky enough to have play clocks. Most of your small schools don't, though, okay? So as a quarterback, what do you look for? You're looking for the white hat. That's the umpire. He's the guy that's back there behind the defense in clear view of the quarterback. As soon as he starts to count like this, that means there's 5 seconds left until you delay a game. So that's what you coach your quarterbacks to do too. If you don't have a play clock, you coach them to keep their eyes on the umpire. As soon as he starts to count, that's when we snap the ball. Okay? And so that's another thing you do. By the way, there are plenty of other reasons for slowing a game down too, besides just trying to keep the score down. In 2008 at Elkhart, the year that we broke that 44-game losing streak, our idea that year, and again, it was to keep the score down, yes, but to keep the score of the other team down, not us. We were trying to avoid those big blowout losses, right? And so what we tried to do was we tried to compress the game. And our idea was, number one, we want to get first downs. We want to keep the chains moving and the clock running, because then if we can compress the game and stay within striking distance, we'll always have a chance to win the game. And when that really paid off, we actually broke the losing streak against Satanta. But the No, against Syracuse. Sorry, against Syracuse. But the very next week we played Sublette, and Sublette probably had the best talent in the league that year. They were pretty well loaded that year. And I told myself and I told the other coaches, if we can just hang close with Sublette, I'm going to be very happy. Okay. And that game came down with, I think, about 3 minutes left in the game. Sublette had a first and goal on about our 5 or 6 yard line. And I thought, well, this is it. At that time, the score of the game was 10-7, I believe. They're going to score here. They're going to beat us 17-7. You know what? I'm tickled to death with that. Our kids have played a hell of a game. I'm really happy with a 17-7 loss against these guys because they're going to go on to be the district champions. And son of a gun, they fumbled the stinking ball away. And we recovered it, I think, on the 2 yard line and turned around. And Marcus Ursick, who had been our starting tailback, he'd gotten hurt earlier in the game. So we had Jesse Hendricks. We'd moved him from fullback to tailback. And that's who we had as our tailback. And of course, we had Jordan Simmons over at the other running back position. And I believe we moved Junior Moreno in at fullback there. You know, Junior, he was still wearing his line number because he was a guard most of the time, but we moved him in at fullback there. And, you know, we drove the ball 98 yards and scored and won that game. Wow. Against honestly what I believe was the most talented team, maybe not the best team, but the most talented team in the league. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Jesse Hendricks just ran his ass off that last drive. As a matter of fact, we drove down and scored and had enough time that we had to kick it back to them. And then we stopped them on downs and got the ball back. And I had to call a timeout to teach them victory formation because, hell, we hadn't won a game in so long and definitely not been in a position where we had to use a victory formation. You know, and I go out there, I call a timeout, and I go out to the huddle, and I kind of quickly teach them victory formation and, you know, just trying to get them excited. I'm like, okay, guys, you know why they call it victory formation, don't you? Because we're about to win this game, you know. And I remember old Jesse Hendricks, he just hugged me. Coach, I love you, man. Those kids were so excited because they got the first win. No, it wasn't. We had won the first game the week before against Syracuse. So, but this is two weeks in a row. One. Yeah, absolutely. It was a better win because it was a better team, but also it was, you know, we're starting now a winning streak, and it's the first game of district. Here we've just knocked off the favorite in the district in the very first game of district. Now suddenly, you know, we've got the inside track to the district championship. We ended up losing up at Johnson and ended up in a 3-way tie for the district championship and got knocked out on the points system, lost the tiebreaker. But the next year we came back and beat Sublette and won the district championship and made a deep run in the playoffs. You know, so those were great kids, but they had to learn how to win, you know. So anyway, I went home, talk about compressing the game. I went home that night and I popped the tape in the, you know, VHS tape back in those days, popped the tape in the VCR, and the actual game portion of the tape was 17 minutes. I mean, really? That's how much we had compressed the game, you know, and we did that by, you know, keeping the clock running and the chains moving. You know, I had told Ulysses Prieto was our quarterback, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Ulysses. And I'd told him, you know, never snap the ball with over five seconds on the play clock, you know, and he did a great job of that. The team did a great job of being patient. Those running backs were finally starting to learn some patience, which would really pay off the next year. In that offense that we ran, the running backs had to learn patience because they had to wait for the blocks to develop and then be able to make a cut back into those blocks. And that's hard for young running backs to learn. And, you know, it took a while for Marcus and Jordan and some of those guys to learn that. But once they did, you know, we were in pretty good shape. And the next year we had a real good team, you know. But it was just a matter of them learning some things. Number one, learning patience. Number two, building some confidence. because when you're losing, it gets to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So winning's the same way too, you know. When you win and you expect to win, winning breeds winning. And losing is just the same way. When you're struggling and you're losing, that lack of confidence breeds losing too. You know, we played in there in that stretch, we played Dalhart, Texas. And our kids, I think, because they didn't, well, first of all, it was Dalhart's JV, okay? But because our kids, I don't think, knew enough to be scared of Dalhart, because Dalhart was a really good program that year. They ended up 10-0. Their varsity did in the regular season, and their JV was pretty damn good too. They really were, you know, and so they were talent-wise, they were more than a match for us. But our kids didn't know enough to be scared of them. Number one, because they were a JV team, and number two, because, you know, they didn't know who Dalhart, Texas was. Okay. But the truth is, Dalhart, Texas is a school that was, you know, it's not quite as big as Liberal, but, you know, it would have been, in Kansas, they would have been a 5A school probably at that time. So they had plenty of kids. They had plenty of talent to go around. Their JV team was far more talented than we were, you know, but our kids just didn't know enough to be scared of them. We were actually leading them late in the fourth quarter, maybe even into the fourth quarter, you know, that we still had a lead in that game before they finally pulled away and beat us, you know. And so you can't underestimate the effects of confidence in the game of football. If your kids believe in themselves, they will play so much harder than if they don't. Mm-hmm. And that then becomes the horrible aftermath of taking a beating like Oskaloosa did against Silver Lake. Whether it was the intention of Silver Lake or not, whether they really ran up a score or if they were doing their best to control things, I don't know, and I'm not going to make that judgment. I wasn't there. I tend not to assign bad intent to other people unless I have a reason to, okay? But the truth is that game will set Oskaloosa back, okay? How much it sets them back will depend on the resiliency of those players and those coaches. But I'll guarantee you it will set them back. And you can sometimes set your team back a whole season with a bad enough performance. And so as a coach, that's just, you know, you can't always avoid getting beat bad. But there are things you can do, hopefully, to temper that a little bit, you know. And so sometimes, as bad as it sounds, sometimes for the mental health of your team, you have to play to not lose instead of that's not even right either. Play to not lose as bad as you would otherwise rather than playing to win. Okay. And that's a hard thing for coaches to learn. Young coaches, especially, that's a tough lesson for them to learn. You know, young coaches, they haven't had that experience yet. If you've coached long enough, you've been 0-9 and you've been 9-0, you know, and everything in between. And so you've learned that when you get beat, the sun's going to come up tomorrow. You've also learned, hopefully, over the years, you know, how to keep your team psychologically healthy. And when your team is down, that's a big part of what you're trying to do as a coach, is keep them physically and psychologically healthy. And so, you know, you've got to do things like try to burn clock, try to slow things down. Is that going to help you win the game? No. But it might keep a 96-0 beat down into the range of a 56-0 beat down. Okay. And which is your team going to be more psychologically scarred by, you know? And so sometimes as a coach, you just have to understand that what you're trying to do is limit the butt kicking, basically, you know? And it's one of those things that as coaches, we don't like to talk about, but for the psychological health of your team, it's the approach you've got to take sometimes. Now, for me, when I was on the winning side, and I probably learned that lesson from my dad, you know, I'm not going to say that I've never intentionally run the score up on a team. but I've never intentionally run the score up on the team without a reason. Okay. 2009, we probably did run the score up a little bit on Johnson. Okay. But that was payback for a whole lot of things that Johnson had done to us for years, and I didn't feel real bad about that. We probably could have held that score down another 2 touchdowns or so. But to be honest with you, it was Johnson, and we had received some pretty rough treatment at their hands in the past. And that's something else as a coach. There's value in payback. Payback is psychologically healthy for the kids and for you sometimes, and for the community, to be honest with you. That's one of those things people don't think about, but hell, sometimes your town needs a little retribution too, and I'm not saying that, to say that there's anything wrong with Johnson or their coaches. Hell, they're good people. You know what I'm saying? But sometimes when you've suffered at the hands of a school long enough, you're going to keep the first teamers in there a little longer. You're going to run up another score or two.
The Garden City, Dodge City Hatchet game thing. I mean, that kind of that just says it all right there. Like, I have friends in Dodge City when I lived in Garden City. Like, if Garden City won, all I had to say, like, all I had to do was show up wherever they were mad, and vice versa. Like, it's, you care, it gets serious.
Yeah, exactly. And those rivalry games are good examples of that, and that the Hatchet game is one of the best rivalry games in the state of Kansas. And there are some really good rivalry games in the state of Kansas. There really are. But the Hatchet game is definitely one of the best. It's one of those that everybody ought to if you love high school football, you ought to go check the Hatchet game out sometime in your life, because it is a big rivalry and it is intense. And, there was a time when Liberal had really good teams there in the 80s and 90s, that Liberal and Dodge City and Liberal and Garden City, while they never had quite the same intensity of the Hatchet game, but that used to be a great 3-way rivalry. In recent years, Liberal hasn't been as good, and so that kind of, starts to go away a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that you try to build back to. Of course, I say it goes away a little bit. It does a little bit, but if you, my guess is if you watch us play this Friday, we'll play Garden City harder than we've played probably anybody else all year. We have a tendency to do that. And usually Dodge City we play hard against. I was a little disappointed with how that game came out, but it wasn't lack of effort. It was the fact that we turned the ball over and we made mistakes at critical times. And that's what always kills you. When you have a good team or a bad team, either one, but especially when your team is not quite as good as it has been, that's when you really, usually the difference between a good team and a bad team is, do you hurt yourselves? Okay. And that's sometimes when you're losing, the reason has more to do with you than it does with the other team. When you're making mistakes at critical moments, when you're turning the ball over, when you're doing things like that, that's what loses you games. And those are things that you can fix. And so as coaches, that's what you're always looking for, is what can we fix here?
This is just a random thought, but like, how boring would your job be if you had an awesome team that never made mistakes? I mean, for real, like your job, it would be fun for like 4 or 5 Fridays, but you'd get bored.
Well, yeah, I don't know that you get bored, but I will say this: anybody can coach a good team.
Yeah,
I mean, and now I'm not necessarily anybody can maintain that level. Okay, because a lot goes into maintaining it. But once you have a good team for 1 game or 2 games or 3 games, anybody can coach a good team. Mm-hmm. I mean, hell, it's easy to be a great coach when every play you run works,
Yeah, right.
It's great to, I mean, it's easy to be a great coach when, when your team just completely manhandles the other team, And so, yeah, it doesn't get boring, but yeah, it's easy coaching when you have a good team. To be honest with you, the coaches that a lot of times do the best job of coaching are those coaches that have a team that has 2 and 7 talent, but they manage to win 4, 5, 6 games. A lot of times, if you want to see the coaches that are doing the best job, look at those schools that are 4 and 5, 5 and 4, 6 and 3. and see, do they really have 6 and 3 talent, or do they have 2 and 7 talent and they've gotten a lot out of their kids? Because those are the coaches that are doing a great job. And not just the coaches, the kids. Those are the kids that are playing their asses off, you know? Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is just making your kids believe in themselves and giving them the fundamentals so that they know how to block, they know how to tackle. You know, too many times as coaches, we worry about X's and O's. We worry about schemes. And the truth is, what you really need to worry about first is fundamentals. Can your kids block and can they tackle? Because if they can't block and they can't tackle, the best schemes in the world are not going to do you any good. Okay? Yeah. You've got to have kids that know how to do the fundamentals of the game. And so really the best coaches are those coaches that build fundamentals. Now, the Nick Sabans of the world, they don't have to build fundamentals. They recruit kids that have already got good fundamentals. They recruit them from programs that they know are fundamentally sound, you know. They don't have to worry about talent. They've got all the talent in the world. And so coaches like that, so much of what they do is the mental aspect of the game, you know. And if you ask Nick Saban or listen to an interview with him, you'll hear that, you know. So much of what he does is just making sure that his players' heads are in the right place, you know. And so all of us as coaches, we want to reach that point where that's all we have to do is make sure that, you know, our kids' heads are in the right place. But, you know, at the high school level, of course, you can't maintain that. You don't recruit, you know, that kind of stuff. So you've got to do other things to maintain that. But
well, I had one question to wrap this back up to what your main point was. What do you tell, because you've been on the receiving end of a beating, like what are those like huddles like? What do you tell your team when you're down 70-0 and there's 10 minutes left and you know that's just going to keep climbing?
Yeah. Well, what you have to do is you have to set goals, and they have to be little goals, incremental goals, right? So they're kicking off to us. Let's see, you know, you get your kids together and you say, guys, get your heads up. And one thing that you always try to teach them is the real measure of a man is not how you respond when things are going well. The real measure of a man is how you respond when things are going to hell. You know, when Rome is burning, that's when you really get the measure of a man. Okay. And so you try to emphasize that to them. And that's not just on Friday night. That's, you know, all week. But then you get them together and you're telling them, hey, listen, we need a good return here. All right. And you try to emphasize what we need to do. All right. Here we go. Front line, you're picking up their middle four. Level 2, we got to get shoulder to shoulder, get that wedge set. Get the wedge set, return men, get up into the wedge, and let's get a return here. And then you pick a little goal. All right, guys, we need a couple of first downs this series, okay? Get us 2 first downs. Let's burn some clock here, okay? You pick little goals and you try to achieve little goals, you know, because the outcome of the game is no longer in doubt, okay? And so what you're looking for is you're looking for small victories, little things you can do to try to help rebuild their confidence. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes when the other team pulls their first team, the team that's getting beat doesn't. You know, in a lot of ways, maybe you should, and you should throw your JV in against their JV. But sometimes you know that your varsity is so shell-shocked that they've got to experience a little bit of success. And so you leave them in there for a series or two against the other team's JV, and you hope maybe you can move the ball or maybe even get a touchdown off of them, you know? And as a coach who's on the winning end, that's something that I don't mind. You know what I'm saying? If me putting the JV in there and letting them get a score against our JV is going to leave them a better team for next week than they would be otherwise, I have no problem with that because I don't want to damage other schools' programs. Okay, there's no school, even like though I admitted that I probably ran the score up on Johnson a little bit, I would never want to do damage to their program. You know, it's just number one, it's not my personal belief, but number two, it's counterproductive. Okay. you never want to do damage to somebody else's program. So if that means that, you know, you give up a score with your JV, then that happens, you know. You don't get after your JV too much about that, right? They're getting some valuable game experience by being in there anyway.
Yeah.
You know. So I don't know, you know, and like I said, I don't know the whole circumstances of the Silver Lake Oskaloosa thing. Like I said, I saw some reports that they played their second and third team the whole second half, and I hope they did, and I'm sure they probably did. I'm not doubting that, you know. All I'm saying is there probably were things that they could have done to avoid a 96-0 win. At the same time, from an ethical standpoint, I don't know that it's your responsibility to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. I think
in a time where this is probably less likely to happen on this level, but in a time where, you know, somebody like Patrick Mahomes can take a game that's like, well, people are probably leaving the stadium and then he wins it. You know, it's like, and this has nothing to do, but like I was playing Madden, like I said, with Kent the other day, and I was beating him by like 30 or 40 points. So I started playing, like, I just started going for the touchdown every play. I threw all fundamentals out the window. But, like, I was and he ended up beating me because I rolled that gamble of, like, but, like, you know, it's kind of the same thing. Like, it wasn't any fun to beat Kent by 30 points. Yeah. It was a lot more fun to lose by 1, and we were both yelling at each other. You know, like, it was a better game.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, I can remember a game when I was at Cimarron, and we got down, I think, 50. I think it may have been 55-6 that we got down in the first half, and the other team pulled their first team, and I didn't. And before you know it, it's 48-55, and they're having to throw their first team back in there. You know, and their first teamers are coming back in cold. They've been standing on the sidelines, you know, and they were, you know, they did finish off the win. We had to try an onside kick at 48-55, you know, for a chance to win, and they recovered the onside kick. And, you know, looking back, I sometimes have thought maybe I shouldn't have left my first team in there, but, you know, we nearly came back into the game and had a chance to win it. And the other thing that I did was I did a whole lot for my team's confidence by doing that, you know? And so I don't really feel too bad about it. I know from an ethical standpoint, I probably should have pulled my first team.
Well, I mean, but at the same time, like you said, you get to like accountability and stuff. Like it really, if the other coach was worried about it, he could have always thrown his first team back in there. So,
and that was my thought. He could have thrown his first team back in there at any time if he felt
I think he, like you, was appreciating a good game that day.
Yeah, maybe so.
Instead of just a blowout, you know, he got to see some good football.
Yeah. But, you know, and luckily we had the kind of team when I was at Cimarron that we could do that kind of thing. We had a quarterback with a cannon for an arm, and we had some good receivers, and we had a fairly explosive offense. You know, you don't always have a team that can come back from that kind of a deficit. And so, you know, yeah, I mean, there's, like I said, there's everything that you look at, there's a million different ways to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But anytime I see a score like 96-0, I'm always bothered by it, you know. Yeah. And again, I'm not blaming Silver Lake or saying bad things about their program, but it bothers me because I know the psychological damage that can do to a program, you know.
Yeah.
And so personally, that's something that I try to avoid. You know, I don't mind beating people and beating them bad, but I'm generally not going to try to run up a score on anyone.
Let me ask you this, not that anybody would, because that other team 254-0. Yeah. Is it an option just to like wave a white flag and be like,
no, it actually isn't.
You have to finish.
Yeah. If you don't, it becomes a forfeit.
Okay.
And I suppose you could do that to screw another team, you know, but technically if you don't finish the game, then it becomes a forfeit and it becomes a 1-0 win. And I suppose, you know, if things were bad enough, you could always do that. I've never been to that point because to me, that would send a really bad message to the kids that we're just going to quit. We're just going to walk off the field, you know, but
not really in the spirit of football.
Yeah, but I don't know, though, at the same time, 256-0, there might come a point where, you know, and again, that happened a long time ago, and I'm sure the circumstances were completely different, but who knows what they were. But yeah, that's one of those that I can't even imagine being on either end of a score like that. That's nuts. 96-0 is nuts to me. 80-0 that East beat North is nuts to me. It happens though, but it is something that I wanted to talk about tonight. Because I think especially people up in the stands, they don't always understand. I think, the people in the stands, they want you to beat the other team as badly as you can beat them, and I get that. Okay. But sometimes I think that, people need to understand the ethics behind that and the thoughts behind it, and we don't all agree. Coaches don't all agree. A lot of coaches have no qualms at all about running up scores on people. And I'm not judging, that's not my place to judge. It's only my place to have my own beliefs about what's right and what's wrong. All right. Let's kind of real quickly take just a few minutes here to run through the matchups coming up Friday night. Okay. In the area, we'll just talk about the ones in the area real quickly. In the WAC, we've got Garden City at Liberal. It's our homecoming there at Liberal. Hopefully we're going to be geared up and ready to go. Unfortunately, if you want to go to the game, whether you're from Garden City or from Liberal, you're going to have to contact your school to arrange tickets because capacity has been capped at 25%. So it's the crowd's going to be pretty limited. Okay, so if you want to go to that game, make sure you contact your school, whether you're from Garden City or from Liberal. Hayes is open this week, as far as I know. They had a cancellation with Abilene, and as far as I know, they have not filled that opening yet. Great Bend is at Dodge City. Hopefully that'll be a pretty good game. Great Bend's off to an 0-3 start. In the High Plains League, we have Syracuse at Cimarron. That's Syracuse is 3-1. They're off to their best start in years. Cimarron is 2-2, but I'll guarantee you they're a good 2-2. Their two losses are to Colby and Holcomb. Okay. Sublette is at Elkhart. I think it's Elkhart's homecoming this week as well. Elkhart is 0-4, and I'm going to tell you this is going to be the best chance Elkhart's had so far this season to get a win. So hopefully the Wildcats can pick up a win in that game. Lakin is at Southwestern Heights. That ought to be a pretty good game. Those are, I believe, the two biggest schools in the High Plains League. Stanton County is at Whitewater Remington. That's going to be a long drive for Stanton County. All right, in the GWAC, we've got Colby versus Southeast of Saline. Holcomb versus Larned. By the way, Colby versus Southeast of Saline, that's kind of the game of the week. Both teams are 4-0, so that ought to be a good game there. We've got 4-0 Holcomb versus 0-3 Larned. 2-2 Hugoton versus 0-4 Nickerson. 2-2 Goodland versus 1-3 Smoky Valley. 2-2 Scott City versus Russell, 0-4. 2-2 Cimarron, we already said, against 3-1 Syracuse. And 1-3 Ulysses has Borger, Texas coming to town Friday night. And I have no idea what Borger's record is. I haven't looked it up. Borger is often kind of a middle-of-the-road team in Texas. Chances are they've won a couple of games, but they're probably not 4-0. I don't know that for sure, though. All right, in the Iroquois League, the Southern Plains Iroquois Association, this is 8-man ball now. We've got 4-0 Southgray versus 2-0 Meade. That's another game with the potential to be kind of a game of the week. We might call that our 8-man game of the week. We've got another good game out of the Iroquois League, 4-0 Spearville versus 3-1 Hodgman County. 2-2 Mineola versus 2-2 South Central. 0-2 Satanta versus 1-3 Buckland. 1-3 Kiowa County versus 1-1 St. John. And 0-4 Ingalls versus 1-1 Dighton. And that kind of rounds out the area matchups this week. So, guys, get out there, go to a football game Friday night. Make sure you tune into the Saturday Breakdown Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. and we'll tell you what happened Friday night. Until then, thank you everyone for tuning in. Check out Back Home Media. This is a Back Home Media production. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see all the places that you can find Back Home Media and all the places that you can find and download In the Free Zone with Norm. We definitely appreciate you checking us out on any of those podcast platforms. Derek, anything else you want to say?
I think that's it, man. I looked it up, and I don't know if this is right, but everything I'm seeing, it says that Borger's 0-5.
0-5, yeah.
Who knows if that's...
It probably 5 is probably the right number of games because Texas has a 0 week. So if you have a 0 week game, then you'll have one more game than some of the other teams.
Okay.
But then you'll have an open date somewhere in there over the course of the season. So yeah, that's kind of Texas and Oklahoma both have that 0 week option. You can start a week earlier, and then you get to start your practice a week earlier. But then you'll end up with an open date somewhere in the season. A lot of teams do it because it really gives you an extra week of practice over the course of the season. And so I'm sure Borger probably played a 0 week game.
Yeah.
So 0-5 wouldn't surprise me coming from Borger. They've been kind of up and down. They're kind of a middle of the road program there in Texas. They've had some good years, but they've had a lot of years that they haven't been that good.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's a good matchup for Ulysses.
Yeah.
Borger is a bigger school than Ulysses, but not a ton bigger. So hopefully that's a good matchup. Those of you in the Ulysses area, that might be a good game to go see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, guys, get out there and watch football. We'll talk to you Saturday afternoon for the Saturday breakdown, and thanks for listening.
See you later.
Well, I don't think it, I thought it, that's different. I said what I said and I meant it, or lamented. Words given weight without thought in a person, the way that I talk and the way that I ought to be able to pause and to say that the fault can be placed on my arm, to display full assault, to disgrace in its arm, pray for the day they could wait for the calm. You can't control the storm, only weather it, whether it's 5 weeks and 5 days of rain sideways, or scorched earth, search for death, or water left with all the thorns, with the petals gone, settle on the breath of autumn. If the ground fits, wear it, the crown fits.